not saying I want stories about how a couple kids almost killed Santa Claus with rat poison in the milk, but I was just like...
I will say from a dark comedy perspective.
Hilarious.
I mean, there's a story there.
That's what I'm saying.
Honestly, the haters can hate. Just let the creators create and let the creator be judged. I mean, too many mistakes to be grudging. Besides, all of us lost without love. Cause maybe some never get woke, or tired of staying awake, or party all night, then distraught at the state of the day.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacy Lee Kong, and this is Friday Talks, Not Bad For Some Immigrants, a video series about the immigrant experience and what that actually means. And I'm here with an amazing, brilliant panel of journalists and friends, Pacinthe, Mattar, Bee Quammie, and Ruth Young, and we're going to be talking about our ideas about the word immigrant, the ideas about the immigrant experience. So not just how we perceive ourselves, but how others perceive us. This is the first episode. I really wanted to kick off this series with this kind of conversation because I feel like the way that immigrants are perceived is super monolithic. There's this one idea of what that means. And even as I was putting together this panel, I was like, okay, well, what is the third culture kid experience? What is the second gen experience? What is the experience of people who are not perceived as immigrants? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that's why I really wanted to start by asking about how you feel about the word immigrant, because I have some feelings about it. So I came here when I was 4, and I grew up in the 90s. Like, I was born in 1985. By the time I came here, we were right in the midst of this conversation around, are we letting in too many immigrants? Are immigrants assimilating enough? And so I would hear that word, and I would understand that I was an immigrant, but I was proud to be from Trinidad. It's not that, but I also wasn't sure if I wanted to apply it to myself. And like, it was actually a bit of a political awakening, I think, to be able to say this word that has negative connotations attached to it is also me. So I would love to hear how you feel about that word.
Yeah, so, I mean, officially I am an immigrant. I moved here, I was born in Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, and came here when I was 3 in the 80s. I don't really, it's complicated. I don't think of myself as an immigrant. The way I think of myself, like my whole life is one that has been marked by moving all the time. So, born in Egypt, came here when I was 3. North York, settled in North York, left again when I was 9, moved to Saudi Arabia for 5 years, 3 different cities in Saudi Arabia, picked up again, moved to Dubai for high school, picked up again, moved here for school. So this idea, I remember seeing this quote in my 10th grade English teacher's classroom. I was in Dubai at the time, Miss Valencia, who was from Malta. I'll never forget her. And she had this quote above her desk that said, "I'm at home everywhere and nowhere. I'm never a stranger, but I never quite belong."
Yeah.
And that quote is like, oh my God, that's me. Because I feel like that has really captured my experience. But I was deeply aware of the fact that I was like not Canadian when I moved here. And I remember when I was younger and my mom would pick me up from school or take me to like Brownies or something, and she'd be like blasting the Egyptian music. I was like, Mom,
yes,
yo, kill it. Like, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me. But now that's like really cool. So I remember just like being young enough to know that like there's parts of us that we should maybe not blast out the window, surrounded by all these white people. But now it's like a huge point of pride. So yeah, I don't consider myself an immigrant because of the unique way that I have moved, or maybe not so unique really, but it's just the not straight up like came here and then settled. Though I am an immigrant, I don't really like consider myself as the typical way that immigrants are talked about.
Totally. Bee, what about you?
So I'm the daughter of immigrants. My parents came to Canada from Jamaica and then had myself and my siblings here. And I grew up in London, Ontario. You know, now it is pretty diverse, but growing up, it was not. And it was really interesting for me because I saw so many different representations of what it meant to be Canadian. And even though I was born here, none of them ever fit what my life actually felt like. So when it comes to the term immigrant, I was actually really proud of the fact that my parents weren't from here. It was kind of like a rebellious thing to be like, all right, Canadians, y'all love your Tim Hortons coffee and your commercials about winter tires that trucks can just drive through all the snow because that's what we do in Canada, and your hockey and all of that. I'm not part of that. I'm over here with my parents and our jerk chicken and our reggae music and all of the things that come with that. And I was actually really jealous of not being born in Jamaica.
Yeah.
I was really, I'm like, why did you guys have to, like, couldn't you just stay a little bit?
Right.
And then, so I could own that word too. I wanted to own that.
Yeah.
Because it felt like a rejection of what I felt Canadiana was. Because with that came a lot of racism. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be a part of that.
And exclusion.
Exactly. Exclusion, racism. And I'm like, okay, if that's what y'all are about, then I'm going to be more proud of what's over on this other side. And I'm going to own that as much as I can, right? So for me, even though I understood the negative connotations that came with the word, like, no, I want to have that because I don't want to be associated with this. And then internally, like within our families, the joke was always like, oh, you guys are the Canadian kids.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I would hate that within my own family because I'm like, no, I want to be fully what you guys are. I don't want this.
Yes.
So that was how I felt when I was younger. And now having my own kids who are born here, who are like really Canadian kids, it's really interesting to navigate, but that was always a word that I actually wanted to claim for myself.
It's so funny, you guys are the Canadian kids. My dad always used to sort of say, you're so Canadianized, when I did something that he didn't want me to do.
Yes.
And so that push and pull is so real. So I'd be like, no, but I'm Trini too. Ruth, what about you?
A lot of people don't see me as an immigrant, and it's something that I will constantly kind of have to remind myself that, no, like I wasn't born in Canada. I didn't spend a good part of my childhood in Canada. I moved here for good when I was around 8 or 9 from Scotland. And it is that like kind of push and pull that like I think everyone's really like spoken about, how you don't feel like you necessarily belong here as like a full Canadian, but you also don't feel like when you go back home that you're a full Scottish person for myself.
Yeah.
I don't sound Scottish, but there's like certain words that I say that don't sound Canadian. It's kind of hard to put my accent fully in one place. I guess when I first moved here, obviously I had an accent. I sounded different than everybody, but I looked like everybody else.
Yeah.
And you're kind of in that sort of wanting to fit in, but not wanting, like trying to balance that out, where it sort of feels like you're in a bit of a no man's land. You don't fully fit in with the people around you, but you also don't fit in with the image that people have of what an immigrant is coming to Canada.
Right.
So it's a complicated word. Because I think most of the people around me don't see me as an immigrant, it's a thing I have to remind myself. But I can definitely relate to like the culture shock of coming here. And like we were referred to as the Canadian cousins when we went back home.
Yes.
Like that was always a thing that we definitely had to experience.
I almost expected you to say that you have to remind other people, but you have to remind yourself.
Yes.
Why is that?
It's whenever I tell people that I was born in Scotland or that like I'm not a Canadian citizen, it's a surprising fact. Or it's like a fun fact about myself.
Right.
Less so more of like a part of my identity.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you move around like kind of like your early sort of, you're getting into like your preteen years. You want to fit into school. You want to like make friends and all that kind of stuff. There's more of a push to reflect your peers.
Yes.
That I think I really tried to drop my accent. And not to say that I'm not proud of being Scottish, but the things that people think of when they think of a Scottish person, it's like all the like kind of like stereotypical or like caricature-y things, like haggis, bagpipes, kilts, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Less so like actually what it means to like grow up in Scotland or what it means to really have that kind of like close-knit community. It's just, okay, you eat this, I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it.
And that's the end.
So it is something that I do kind of remind myself frequently that I am a Scottish person. I'm not fully Canadian.
Yeah. Does it feel weird to not be, because I think people perceive me as not quite belonging as a default. Like even if I don't think it matters whether I was born here or not. You know what I mean? The color of my skin and my parents and their accents, which I don't hear, but other people really do, that already marks you as other. Does it feel weird to have this thing that is important to you kind of not be perceived?
Because part of it is it's just like, it's kind of erased.
Yeah.
People don't see it, they don't hear it, they don't really know it. I think now more than ever it feels weird.
Yeah.
Because I'm starting to realize, like, as you get older, and I still like to remind myself that I'm young.
We're all very young.
But you start to try to figure out more about yourself, more about like who you are as a person and how you maneuver through the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's becoming a bit more important to me now. For so long, it wasn't talked about. It wasn't like a daily conversation. So it just kind of felt like it didn't really matter.
But it did.
But it did.
Yeah.
And also, trying to like regain those little parts. I'd like trying to like, you know, connect more with like family back home. And like I went back home a couple years ago for the first time in a really long time. And that was lovely, but it's just, I think it's becoming more important now than it was when I was a kid, because really you're like, I just want to fit in.
100%.
Was like the biggest kind of motivating factor.
100%. I feel like that's what it has been for me too. I spent so much time trying, and I grew up in Oakville, so like everyone around me was white basically. Sometimes I would be the only person of color in a class or like one of a couple. And so all I wanted to do was to be like my peers. I didn't want anyone to forget that I was Trini, but I didn't want it to matter that I was different. And now I'm like, well, no, but I am. Okay, Bee, I'm really interested in your perspective on this question too, because I know in a previous life you worked in healthcare. So to a certain extent, Canada, definitely Toronto, talks about immigration and diversity in a really marketing kind of way. So we have 2.7 million immigrants from 250 ethnicities, and diversity is our strength, and all of these things. But do you think that the way that our politicians, our services, our cultural institutions, the way that they talk about immigration or talk about immigrants and diversity actually reflects the way that they treat these populations?
When I was thinking about this initially, you know, I wanted to be like, no, it doesn't fit, because like you're saying, diversity is our strength and all those things. But when you actually listen to what these politicians are saying, and when you actually see how these institutions run, and compare that to the usually less than favorable experience of immigrants, it does fit.
Right.
You know, I always kind of say the idea of, you know, the machine is running the way it's supposed to. A lot of this stuff is PR, and I always say, especially to, you know, our friends down in the South, just underneath us, Canada has like the best PR, best global PR, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily say that now, today, but in this kind of conversation, right? That's always a thing because of those things. You see the multiculturalism of Toronto, and you can get all this different food and all the different languages. We also have a premier who speaks of immigrants as people who are coming here to just get on welfare, who don't want to pull their weight and contribute in any way. Canada has a baked-in, very recent shift to moving away from the very racist immigration policies that this country was built on.
Yes.
We are not aligning with this idea of the diversity is our strength type of thing. When I worked in healthcare, even the idea of trying to get people to understand the impact of culturally competent care, it was like, oh, you're being racist to white people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we have to diversify how we approach these things, because if you're concerned that a client or a patient is not following instructions, they're not following the diet, they don't understand when you're saying X, Y, and Z, why is that? Maybe if we approach this in a culturally competent way, based on their background, you will have better success. But you bring that up, and it's like, we can't do that, because that's not fair to everybody else. We can't treat other people special. And it's the whole idea of like equity, equality, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people feel like, well, I'm treating everybody the same, so I'm a good person. And it's like, no, when we put out this call outside of Canada about how amazing Canada is, and you will be welcome here, and, you know, come and be part of this cultural mosaic, people get here, and the amount of people, especially in my parents' generation, who feel duped.
Yes.
They came here thinking Canada was supposed to be something. And a lot of their retirement plans are like, how the hell do I get back to where I'm from? Because I don't want to stay here. They lied to me. This was not what I was promised. This is not what I thought the experience was supposed to be, because that is what is created by gatekeepers and by people in power, is this idea of you come here and we're going to siphon what we want from you. We're not going to acknowledge, except in a very superficial way, your differences. We'll use it when it benefits us.
Yeah.
But for your day-to-day life, we're not going to make it any better for you.
And I feel like I say this all the time, but it's so much of it comes back to capitalism, because it's not that we came here of our own, it wasn't our idea all the time. Like, we were actually marketed to.
Exactly.
And Caribbean people in particular are here because of a campaign, a government campaign.
The West Indian domestic scheme.
Yes, to bring in, this is why I want to be here. She remembers all the things, all the names. I was like, it's a thing that I can't remember what it's called.
That's it,
But it's not that immigration happens in a vacuum or that people are like, oh, it's a great life and I want part of it. We are actually asked to come.
Exactly.
And then when we get here, the treatment is not, we are not treated as if we are welcomed, additions.
And the things that we're bringing are welcome to building the tapestry of Canada. Look at, like, the West Indian domestic scheme was, something that happened back in, like, the 1950s, where Caribbean women were marketed to come to Canada and work as domestics in white homes. That's around the same time as the women's liberation movement for white women who wanted to be able to work outside of the home. But when the white women are working outside of the home, who's taking care of the kids? Who's cooking the dinner?
Right.
So the labor of largely Black Caribbean women was seen as like, okay, well, this is what we need to facilitate this for everybody else. Right. And when you look at the stories that these women have told about their experiences, a lot of them are horrific. We can look at how migrant farm workers are treated in Canada. Right now, you are brought here marketed to for your labor, and you are given what? Horrific conditions. And when you raise them, you are not heard. The amount of stories that continue to come out about how migrant farm workers are treated, it's ridiculous, because it's just like, is nobody paying attention? But again, that's the machine. We don't want to pay attention to that.
Exactly.
Just, good things grow in Ontario. By whose hands? By whose hands?
Exactly.
Right? And we continue the promise of, next time it'll be better. Next season will be better. These people come back every time and experience the same thing. And the machine is doing what it does.
All the time. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing to remember too, is that we have to actively fight against a system that is working exactly as it's intended.
Exactly.
Like every step that we've made forward, every piece of progress that we have made is 100% in opposition to the whole system.
Right, 100%.
Because I feel like I have to remember that when I'm like, well, things are not changing quickly enough. I thought we were going to be further along. And it's like, I'm saying this because you actually clarified it for me yet again, as I needed, to be like, okay, but there's a reason that it's not going to happen quickly. It's never going to happen quickly.
Because it's not supposed to.
Yeah. It's really not supposed to happen at all.
Exactly.
Okay, shifting gears a tiny bit. P, one of the main reasons that I wanted to have you on the panel was because you don't claim that title of immigration or immigrant because you have a different experience. But to your point, it's not uncommon. I think the idea of being a third culture kid gets a lot more play in academic circles than in our pop culture, in our policy, in our just like daily conversations. So when you think about the experiences of immigration and immigrants that you see around you, do you see your experiences anywhere?
Not really. I mean, I feel like the immigrant experience, like the one that I see often is like the family who comes, who's struggling, who wants so badly to be incorporated into hockey, Canadiana.
Tim Hortons.
To Tim Hortons.
Exactly.
And it's like this like striving for like inclusion into this trope of being Canadian. And don't get me wrong, like I don't know, I'm thinking through this in real time, and it's like my parents, they wanted us, they put us in French immersion schools. We took ice skating. My brother went into Boy Scouts, I went into Brownies. But I think they just wanted us to really reap the benefits. Like one of the big reasons my dad even moved us here was he wanted us to have a really good education. Yeah. Education was the design point. Egypt was starting to I think my dad kind of predicted the future and saw that Egypt was kind of not what he wanted it to be for us. But I haven't seen stories of, again, like what you see in pop culture and what's represented. It's often the like, struggling, stressed out immigrant families as opposed to ones like when we heard about Santa Claus. I mean, we're Muslim, right? So I was just like, wait, you're saying this old man is gonna come down the chimney? Yeah. And picture like 4 or 5-year-old me. I'm just like, wait a minute.
Suspicious already.
And like, I just remember like a story about me getting to know what Santa Claus is and who Santa Claus was. And me and my brother sat and strategized. We're like, okay, my parents put out like milk and cookies. They wanted us, even though we're Muslim, they wanted us to have this like experience. And I'm glad we didn't do this, but we were like, we're gonna put some poison in the milk.
Oh my God.
So that like when Santa Claus comes, like we're gonna find him and we're gonna catch him. So I'm like, I'm not saying I want stories about how a couple kids almost killed Santa Claus with rat poison in the milk, but I was just like,
I will say from a dark comedy perspective.
Hilarious.
I mean, there's a story there.
This is what I'm saying. But it's always just like, oh, the kids that couldn't afford to play hockey. Or just
yes.
So I'm like, there's experiences that I've had that, and so many of us, right? Like I keep saying like, I'm not unique. I think where I do see it represented a little bit, although still very flat and very two-dimensional, shows like Rami, you know, about an Egyptian American, shows like Mo, who's about a Palestinian American. And I would say when these stories are represented, it's often through men.
Yeah.
And I get so frustrated about this because I'm like, a woman or a girl's immigrant third culture experience is so much more rich and layered and textured, and it's like who we are at home versus who we are outside and coming into ourselves. So, I mean, in short, I just think that we don't do like complexity very well. And I still think there's this appeal to like, you know, the danger of the single story that Chimamanda spoke about years ago. And I think we haven't broken through kind of more complex, funny, irreverent, not rooted in like sadness and hardship. Not to say that that isn't part of the story. There's so many more interesting stories to tell about being third culture. But, you know, I'll be honest, like I don't even think people really see me as third culture either. Like, you know, I don't have a discernible accent.
Yep.
You know, I kind of pass for a lot of different things. And I think I'm like a comfortable type of immigrant, right? Like I'm very aware that, you know, I worked in mainstream media for a very long time and it was like just enough diversity to make them feel like, oh, we have her in the room.
We're doing something.
But I can still joke with you about this and that, like, so, I don't know. I say this to say, like, I feel like I wear many hats and there's just like a constant code switching that we do as third culture kids. But like growing up in places like Toronto and Dubai and Saudi Arabia, like I have friends from all over the world and all of those things have seeped into who I am and how I communicate, how I understand the world. But I don't think that I get to embody that very frequently because it's just like, just give us this one little piece of you. Or at the same time being relied on to be the voice of all those other people. Because, you know, so it's complicated.
It's so complicated.
In short.
That answer is actually exactly why I wanted to theme this season around immigrant stories because I was so tired of, even though my own personal family history is a lot of striving and it is hardship and we didn't have a lot of money and in many ways it mirrors the dominant narrative around immigrants, but it's not the only story. And it feels like that is the only story. And even within our experience, there was so much more happening. And there are so many different types of immigrants, especially now. Like, if you are coming here, you may come here with like so much money. You may be a total baller. That is not gonna be $50 in my pocket. I had to strive to survive. Like, and I think there is also an investment in seeing immigrants in that state of hardship. Just the idea of so much texture and so much richness in the fullness of our stories, like that's what I wanted to get at. So I'm so glad that you said that. Okay, last question for everybody, and kind of building on that. What do you think we're losing when we only have a single story about immigrants or about people? Like, because this also sort of connects to often people of color, but not exclusively people of color. So what do we lose when we have such narrow ideas of what immigrants are?
I mean, honestly, we're missing, like when I think of like the things that we talk about in our group chats, for example.
Yes.
Like we are missing such amazing stories because we still have this like very singular lens about what the immigrant story is. And I think people feel like they have to kind of parcel themselves out in a certain way. And I think about, you know, the limits of like representation and wanting to be seen and wanting to get opportunities. I mean, you feel almost compelled to highlight the hardship instead of the quirky, like, oh, we wanted to poison Santa Claus when we were young. Because it's like, oh, that doesn't fit into the story of what an immigrant story is. So I don't know. I just think, I think the world is a lot more complex than we see it in our media, in our stories. And I think we are like living proof of how complex it is. And like, I dream about like, you know, I'm like, with all due respect to Rami and Mo and those kids, like, or those
kids.
Not those kids.
Those young men.
With all my respect to them, like, imagine they gave us a show.
Literally.
That was about like me, you, and our aunties group chat and like, you know, often eldest daughters of immigrants who are making it work, in their professional lives, and who they are, their relationship to themselves. We're missing like a really, really big part of what's happening these days. And I don't know, I really think that like people like us can really run the world if we aren't just like still parceling ourselves out in these like very limited ways.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
Just a thought.
Just a thought. Just someone take a letter.
Someone.
Bee, what about you?
You know, and I feel like we're all gonna echo this. We're losing so much because we're losing, within Canada, we're losing the opportunity to have this country literally be the best that it could be.
Yes.
When we are, again, going back to your point about the marketing, we're doing this marketing campaign, we're getting the bodies in, but then we don't want you to really do what you feel you need to do here. And Canada is so stunted by that, right? By this singular story of this idea of struggle, this idea of redemption or the benevolence of Canada that comes into play.
Yes.
And we really flatten a lot of what this country could be.
It really like engenders this smallness of,
Very
right?
much
Like your perspective is smaller than it could be. And why would you ever want that?
And that's my struggle, is looking at people who are fine with this very limited view of the people and the lives and the cultures around them. And I'm like, but why do you want that? We have the capacity for so much more.
Also, aren't you, like, I'm so nosy. I want to know, whatever, like we may as well just embrace it. But like, I want to know what you like to eat. I want to know what are the similarities between us. Like, I think that's so cool. Why don't you want to know?
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, no.
Ruth, what do you think?
Definitely echo everything that's been said. And I also think that you're missing the opportunity just to learn about those around you.
Yes.
You're losing out on like being able to meet people from different cultures, learn things about new cultures, learn new things about yourself that you wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to do if you weren't able to expand that kind of scope of what that idea of an immigrant is.
I also feel like this is very earnest, which, I don't know. I'm not actually a cynic. I just kind of joke that I am. But I also feel like there is actually more, like we are actually all human beings. There's more that connects us than separates us.
Right.
And so much of the upheaval that we see in our local politics, provincial, national, international, is about forgetting that. And I actually just think it's so nice when you can be like, yo, we eat that too, or we do that too. Sometimes it is colonization, that's the reason why. But, fine.
But still,
like, isn't it nice to be like, oh, my brother does that too. Oh, all little brothers are like, or whatever.
Even sitting here and just like listening to everybody's different perspectives on coming to this country or moving around in this country, it's like, oh yeah, I feel that, I get that. But we don't look anything alike.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I can definitely connect to all of those types of emotions or feelings or moments.
Totally.
Which is really, really cool to see.
Exactly. And I was just going to add that the idea of the earnestness that you were mentioning is very true, but people have to decide, are you willing to upend the power dynamic of what it means to be able to say, I'm different and this different is better than you're different? Or do we want to really dismantle that so that we can have this space flourish the way it needs to flourish? So
exactly.
That's the question.
It's a question. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so good. I feel like I could have actually talked for 7 or 8 more hours. We're gonna wrap it up. Before I let you all go, where can people find you, starting with P?
If you have my name, Pacinthe, Pacinthe, I've got a website, Pacinthe.com, just like Beyonce, Rihanna.
Absolutely.
Pacinthe.com, Pacinthe on Instagram, Pacinthe on Twitter.
Perfect. B?
Me, I'm Bee Quammie, so B-E-E, like a bumblebee, Q-U-A-M-M-I-E, and Google that, you'll just find me.
You'll find you. Okay, Ruth, what about you?
You can't really find me. I don't have a LinkedIn, don't really have an Instagram, usually the like 4th or 5th Google search. I'm gonna keep it that way.
I love that. Let's opt out. If you would like to find Friday Things, however, you can find us at @_Friday Things or go to www.fridaythings.com/subscribe to sign up for the newsletter. And obviously like, share, and comment, because I'm like an influencer now. But thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you everyone for watching.
Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it? Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it. I'm talking about ways we can elevate. Stepping up, staring, we escalate. Don't try to separate, we'll get together and celebrate. I can do everything, I just don't hesitate. I can do anything. Allow me to demonstrate. I just can't wait, I just cannot be me. I just can't go back.